What's up, YouTube? It's Biblical Truther. That picture you just saw is what the ancient world considered to be the earth and the cosmology of it. You know, no outer space. When the Bible says that the earth is God's footstool, that's kind of the interpretation that they had, that God's throne is directly above us and that we're in an enclosed system. And they put it in movies and stuff, you know, kind of hidden in a way, like this right here.
A person is smart. People are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it. 1,500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was flat. And 15 minutes ago, you knew that people were alone on this planet.
So that was the Men in Black. And you see how he's talking about 500 years ago, everybody knew that the Earth was flat. Well, we're starting to realize now that we're not alone either, but they're not aliens from outer space. They're fallen angels that have been here for millennia now. But I want to share with you some things that allowed me to wake up to the truth of the Bible, that it's not just figurative or allegorical, it's literal in more ways than we think or have been taught. So I guess we can't put a limit to God's creativity, right? You know, because we see in the world that we live in and what we know to be factual in this world, just how creative he can be with different animals, plants, insects. I mean, there's some pretty wild things out there, still stuff that's being discovered all the time. And it's some pretty crazy looking animals, crazy looking insects. So who's to say that this world at one time wasn't some crazy, fantastical world? Well, I'm going to show you some things that lead me to believe that it once was a fantastical world. I mean, we got, and I know that Alice in the Wonderland, what Alice means and all that, I get the whole gist of it, but in the sense of how Wonderland looked, right? When Alice goes back, she's in, I think when she met the Mad Hatter in the first Alice in Wonderland, she was amongst all these ginormous mushrooms and these plants that were just huge. And to the people that lived in Wonderland, they weren't that big, but to her, they were ginormous, basically. So, and it's not just that movie. There's several movies like The Never-Ending Story, and the animals that were within the Never-Ending Story, and not just the animals, the humanoid-like beings, I guess you could call them. You know, what we would call dwarfs or trolls, or even like the big dog dragon. If you pay attention to this video I'm fixing to show you here in a minute, you can absolutely see that dog slash dragon very well could not have been someone's imagination, but an actual animal that existed at one time. And if you've done any diligence and, you know, watching some Extreme Reality Checks videos, I got one I'm going to play of hers as well, but I think she's got a whole playlist that goes to the petrified giants in plain sight. And you should go check that out, because I, having a full-time job, I don't have time to do the amount of research and put together these great videos like they do. Many people out there, because you can find them all over YouTube about these petrified giants and petrified tree stumps all over the earth that they tell us are something else. But as far as how the world was pre-flood, we really don't know. I mean, the people who run this world now has hidden everything from us, you know, and it's mainly the Smithsonian You can go back to the late 1800s, early 1900s even, if you can still find them. Newspaper clippings all over America finding giants, remains of giants. You can look up old tales of different Indian tribes that talk about having to fight these giants. Some of them that had horns even. Some of them with pointy ears. I mean, down in South America, they even had, when the conquistadors went into South America, conquering and to conquer, when they found the old Aztec ruins, they found some actual, in the process of decaying, these giants. And if you've not looked those up, they have some drawings and depictions of these giants and what they look like. They were in excess of 30 foot tall. And if you've seen the Predator movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger, these giants that they depicted back in the early 15 to 1600s, I believe it was, actually look like the aliens from that movie. So it makes you start looking at things that they show us in a whole new light. Like, maybe these people don't have this broad imagination. Maybe they're just either having been told these stories, or having dreams of stuff that happened, years and years ago, and they get these depictions of these giants and all the wild, fantastical looks about them, and they put them in these movies. I don't know how they come up with it. I'm just speculating on that. But it's weird that when you start going back through history, a lot of movies actually depict some of the things that are actually out there. And Extreme Reality Check did a good job on the first video she made. I think it was the first one in the playlist about the petrified giants. She goes into the science of petrification. And there's been scientists that have actually petrified things in a lab setting. Given the right soil content and the right pressure, you can actually petrify something in a time span of about 40 days. Now that's kind of ironic that they could do it in 40 days, because we know that Noah's flood, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And if biblical cosmology, if this earth is exactly what the ancient Hebrews had a conception of, basically like a snow globe type situation, then filling that bowl up all the way up to the heavens with water would create an immense amount of pressure down here on the earth, would it not? But before I show you the petrified giants, I want to show you this map right here and just give you a little concept of what I think could have happened back then. And when in Genesis, when it says God had opened up the fountains of the deep, that could have been the actual crust erupting. Check this out real quick. Now that's kind of showing all the different trenches, I guess, in the oceans that we have today. Because in the Old Testament, it didn't talk about oceans, it talked about rivers. And they might have had small bodies of water, but they weren't oceans like we have today. So when God opened up the fountains of the deep, when he sent the flood, it wasn't just the rain for 40 days and 40 nights. It was the water under the earth that had erupted. And I believe, and I contend, having been a plumber, for 20 years, I understand this. When you have a leak in your yard, say a water line busts, and you start having just a little stream of water seep up, right, onto the ground where you can see it. The longer that goes, the longer the leak stays leaking, you don't fix it, the more that hole opens up, and the more you're going to see a flow of water coming out of that hole. But at the same time, it's pushing the soil up and out, right? So if he cracked open this crust that we call earth, and the waters from the under the earth came up, and they started spewing the longer they spewed, the more sediment, the more sand, the more dirt, whatever, is going to spew out and go to the surrounding areas. And I believe that all these trenches that we see are remnants of those cracks from the fountains of the deep, where the water was erupting from the ground. I think God had shook the earth to the point where the ground cracked open and these waters came up from underneath. Because if you read any extra biblical text, it talks about how fast the water rose. It rose so fast that the people could not run to the high hills that they had at that time to escape how fast it rose. So you had the windows of heaven open, and then you had the fountains of the deep broke up. So all these trenches that we see today, and all the mountain ranges along those, which we call continents for the most part today, like, you know, the Appalachian Mountains in America, for instance, you have I think it's the Mariana Trench, and then you have another one off the coast of California that created basically the Rocky Mountains. So the fountains of the deep basically erupted and caused all this sediment and dirt to just burst into the air. And that's why you see some of these animals that are petrified in a standing position. Some of them are looking off afar like they heard something. Like the pig that you might notice that looks like a pig with piled up with sediment on its back. So that could have been, you know, the dirt, the sediment that erupted. Now once you fill this snow globe up with water, the turbulence of the water just moving back and forth and sloshing is going to create such a sediment like powdery silt on the bottom. And as stuff dies, it floats to the bottom and settles and is covered up by the sediment that remains in the water. Because we don't know how turbulent it stayed while Noah was in the ark, floating way up above everything. So it's very possible that until the windows of heaven were closed and the fountains of the deep were shut up, that could have been quite a turbulent situation where there was, you know, quite a bit of waves going on. And that would have stirred up the sediment a good bit. So naturally, whatever had died would have been covered up by the sediment. Now you got an immense amount of pressure on top of that with the amount of water, because you're talking possibly miles deep. And we know what, you know, modern day science says about the Mariana Trench. Trying to get to the bottom of a 7-mile deep trench, you got to have some serious equipment just because of the pressure. So would it not be possible with such pressure and the vast amount of different types of sediment sloshing around on the Earth's surface underneath all this water could have caused these giants and titans and animals to become petrified? And once the waters receded and God pushed that water back underneath the earth where it was, all these things would have been covered up. But over, you know, a couple thousand years worth of precipitation and rain, these things started uncovering themselves. You know, now we can see the faces of the giants. That's why you can see some of these things, you know, hundreds and hundreds of feet tall, still standing. Some of them were sitting down because I have no doubt they might have known this was coming. Because Enoch was, if you read any of the extra biblical books, and I know a lot of people don't read those, but Enoch absolutely talks about having to intercede with God because God would not talk to the fallen angels once they were cast down out of heaven. Now it talks about also that these titans and the Nephilim, the offspring of the fallen angels, were going around cutting down trees and destroying the earth, which is why the flood came to begin with. So with that kind of thought process, it would make sense that we would just now start to see the remnants of these giants all over the earth. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and play this. It's about 15 minutes of nothing but pictures of faces in the rock. Some of them are whole bodies. They even got a mountain that's almost 2 miles long that they call the Sleeping Giants, where the Book of Enoch absolutely says that they could have been that tall, these titans. So check this out. Genesis 6:4, it says there were giants on the earth in those days and also afterwards, meaning after the flood there were still giants on the earth. So here's another short clip. It's only about 3 minutes of some modern day stuff that they found just in the last probably 50 to 70 years. Check this one out. we found all over America, these burial mounds with giant bones in them, where the Smithsonian swoops in and collects everything and it disappears. And the Vatican's been at the top of that deception and cover up as well. All you got to do is do a little research and you'll find that that's a fact. You can still find the newspaper articles of these things being found all over America when the settlers were just, starting to move out west and really starting to build towns and stuff and excavating and doing all these type of things. They were finding these giant bones all over the place, but they weren't, in the miles tall or thousands of feet tall. They were in the 10 to 30, 40, 50 foot range. But this stuff has made me take a look at the Bible in a whole nother light. This is undeniable in my book, and I've showed some people this, and even with the amount of information and the amount of different places and the archaeological digs, and not only that, but they've taken x-rays to some of these Nephilim giants and titans also, and found that they have veins running through these rocks, what would be a modern day, human hand with the vein structure and stuff inside the hand that they found by x-ray in these rocks. It's pretty amazing, but it's not just the beings, the Nephilim, the titans that were huge like that. It was also plant life. It was also trees. And I want to play this one for you right quick. This is Extreme Reality Check. This is, I think, her second one in that playlist. It might be a couple in there, I don't know, but this one is more so about the trees. Check this one out.
This is a volcanic igneous intrusion where the lava came up in this form 225 million years ago. No, of course it's not. It's a tree stump. Anybody can see that. It's a tree stump. And so is this. And so is this. And so is this. And so is this. I think you get my point. We see these remnants of this massive, massive forest that once covered the earth, these massive trees. We see the tree stumps. And we're just told they're mesas, right? Mesas. Just amazing. Mesa means tabletop because they're flat on top. So we see these massive, petrified trees, stumps of trees all over planet Earth. That's not even the shocking part. The shocking part is who cut them down. They're completely flat on top. And that leads us back to the video that I did yesterday about these enormous humanoid beings from the first Earth Age that we also see petrified all around us. At some point, we have to realize it's not a coincidence that we see faces and skulls and hands and feet littered all in the rocks of our landscape all around us. And then we see other life forms, not just the animal kingdom, but the plant kingdom. We see enormous tree stumps also petrified in the landscape all around us. At some point, we have to let go of this false paradigm that the mainstream has fed us. And we have to start real science. We have to admit that we are not the pinnacle of everything. Let your ego go. Check your ego. And let's evaluate what we see with our own eyes. And we know not all trees are cut down. Of course, some fall down in massive storms and cataclysms and high winds, and some just from rot. So do we see any evidence of that? Well, let's take a look. Now, I'm obviously not saying that every mountain on planet Earth is a fallen tree or a fallen giant. That's not at all what I'm saying. I completely understand that we have natural events, we have erosion, we have earthquakes, we have over the millennia, we've had tons of cataclysms and, mudslides and all sorts of things. I completely agree. I'm not saying that we need to discount all of that stuff, the natural events, but what I'm saying is that we don't need to discount this research either. That there are, we make them national landmarks for a reason. We recognize that they stand out in the landscape. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that every single mountain is a fallen tree or a fallen giant, so don't twist my words. I'm just saying that there clearly are petrified remains of the antediluvian world all around us, and we can see them. We see hands and feet and faces and skulls and tree stumps and all of it. We see all of it right in front of our eyes. We have to stop disregarding all of these things and just calling them anomalies and mysteries because they don't fit the false paradigm. And we have to quit trying to force a square peg in a round hole with these bogus theories. Not one scientist in any of our lifetimes has ever seen lava flow in straws, in long fibers, hexagonal fibers. But we do see this structure everywhere in plant life. So maybe if we see something that looks like a giant petrified tree stump and it has this perfect plant-like cellular structure, we could just start there. Okay, so this is the United States National Monument we call Devil's Tower. And you can clearly see all of these hexagonal columns that go up the length of the entire structure. Now, they tell us lava did this. I've never seen lava flow straight up in perfect hexagonal columns, but that's what they say. And we see this same pattern in these buttes and places all across the earth. And you can see it does not look the way lava flows. So it's just mind-boggling that that's the conclusion they came to. But the conclusion that I come to is that it perfectly mimics the structure of plant life. And you can see even the gravel, as the bark and different parts of the petrified tree have eroded off over the years, there's a gravel pit all around the structure. So there's the petrified stone, there's the missing pieces, and it reveals this sort of core of this tree stump that to anybody besides modern geologists, it looks exactly like plant life. And we see this structure everywhere. It's not just in Wyoming. This geometric pattern that we know we see throughout different life forms, it's a repeating sort of building block of life and cellular structure. We see it all on every continent. These eroded down trees, plant life, it's eroded down, and you can see these same sort of hexagonal geometric patterns. And regardless of what type of environment, they're in all different vast environments. They're not just like right around volcanoes or anything, but it doesn't matter. Everywhere geologists see them, they just explain them as lava. Like here, you can see some of them, apparently the lava fell from the sky. It didn't break up through the ground as an intrusion because because the hexagonal fibers, the pillars, don't even reach the ground. But anyway, here's a slideshow to take a look at some of these. They're everywhere. The evidence is everywhere.
So that's just pretty mind-blowing, right? I mean, they tell us, these modern-day archaeologists and scientists tell us that it's volcanic rock. But as she stated, volcanoes don't have a lava flow in hexagonal patterns. Some say that that's the fingerprint of God, because our trees and plant life today still have that. But if you think of it in these terms, if you can't wrap your mind around the fact that things were huge to that size, that magnitude, you know, a mile tall, 2 miles tall, trees that were several miles tall. Well, in an atmosphere with vegetation to that extreme, you would have a great abundance of oxygen. And the more oxygen you have in the atmosphere, the bigger something's going to grow. It's a scientifically proven fact that that's absolutely the case. So if the earth was not covered in ocean, 70% covered in ocean like it is now, and it was vast forests and trees and just magnificent wilderness with plant life to that extreme, then you'd be able to understand how things grew that big. Now, that would also kind of play into the fact of how long people lived back then. You know, if you had an oxygen-rich environment of, say, 80% oxygen, or even 60% oxygen, it would be astronomical the size things would get. Because right now, our oxygen atmosphere is about 24.6, 24.8 on a good day. Anywhere from 21% to 24%. That's our average oxygen percentage in our environment that we live in. So naturally, we're going to be a lot smaller than they were back then. So it's just kind of crazy that they make all these movies and stuff and call it fantasy. But is it really fantasy? Or is this these elites who have these ties and stories and stuff that they tell us is mythology, but real stories within their families that they're hiding from everyone, that they know that this is the type of world that was here before the flood? It's just crazy to think about. I like thinking about it, you know, because if the earth was that fantastical, how much more fantastical is heaven gonna be? You know what I'm saying? Because you can't put a limit on God's creativity. And it's like the movie Avatar, you know, where they were running through the forest and through the trees, and every footstep stuff would light up. And then they were, you know, the trees were so massive that they were able to, like, live in them. You know, perhaps that was what it was originally like. Now, can't prove it other than what I'm showing you here with the petrified remains of stuff that quite possibly would have been that fantastical. But where do they get these ideas from? You know, I mean, we do have a great imagination as human beings, I give you that. But the way they operate, the way they forecast things in their movies and the media and all, it makes you kind of rethink. All these movies that you've seen over the years, are these really just someone's imagination? Or is these stories passed down through these elite bloodlines, you know, the ones that are basically head of Hollywood and got all the money, got all the knowledge, the enlightened ones, if you will. You know, they feel like they know more than we do, and have made us to dismiss things. It's kind of like when you were kids looking at the clouds, you know, and this one looks like a dinosaur, that one looks like a dog. You know, when you look at a mountaintop that looks like a face, or you see one that looks like a face with an Indian headdress, you know, you kind of wonder where the Indians got their looks from, where they got their ideas of these headdresses. Well, in that first video with all the pictures, you can absolutely see what looks like petrified heads with headdresses on, because we have no idea what these fallen angels look like that came here to the earth.
Text message from Whitney.
And we have no clue what their offspring would have looked like. You know what I'm saying? Because it says in the Bible that there's angels with 3 heads, or not 3 heads, but 3 faces. You know, the cherubim, I believe it said, has 3 faces. The face of a man, the face of an eagle, and the face of a lion. So if they were to have offspring, what would they look like? They would look like a fantastical creature, I would imagine. So I just wanted to put this out there because it made me kind of rethink the entirety of the Bible. You know, if these things that are all over the earth were actually real, living beings that roam the earth, then who's to say that the earth was not this fantastical place that has been shrunken, if you will, by means of the flood, you know, because they're steady finding these megalithic structures deep under the ocean, you know, some of them hundreds and hundreds of feet deep in the ocean. So that means something was living there. And if you think about a glass of ice water, you put ice in a glass of ice water and fill it up with water. When the ice melts, the water level doesn't change. If anything, it gets less. So you can't say it's because the polar ice caps melted and the water rose. That don't make any sense. Because if that water, that ice, you know, being in the water, it wouldn't displace that much water to cause, you know, stuff to be hundreds of feet below the surface. It just wouldn't happen. When ice forms, it actually gets bigger than its original state, its liquid state. You know, you can fill a water bottle up with water, stick it in the freezer, and when you pull it out, the top's probably going to be popped off of it because it's expanded. Therefore, when the ice melts, it actually loses volume. But just something to think about. This is one of the major things that woke me up when God first called me to himself. So just want to leave you with all this stuff, guys. Just something else to think about, you know. Love you guys.